really a journey that I take you on, because as I say, it's not one paper that I'm describing, but really so bringing out work from several decades of my work, you know, and I started out in the 1980s working on artificial intelligence and databases. Only we did artificial intelligence quite differently at the time, based on what some of you may know as propositional logic. So we wrote logic statements and had the computers crank on those, which was at the time seemingly good approach, but now we know what can really be done. In this talk, you know, I try to be not very technical. I'm happy if you ask me questions about some more technical details. I know it's a big broad audience with several different backgrounds. I bring in certain examples. If some of you say, oh, what's the business relationship with it? Ask me that as well. I'm happy. Tell me when I'm wrong. You know, it would be very boring if I'm right on everything, because then I cannot learn anymore, right? It's my only chance to learn is if you tell me what's right that I got wrong. So with that, I'm also happy to interrupt my talk anytime you have a question, or we can do this at the end both ways, so I can squeeze things in the end if we need to. So with that, I'll get started. I already mentioned my title, and so I describe in a nutshell of how this journey is going to evolve. So first, I'll describe the importance of collective intelligence, how I see it, and explain really the magic behind that, because so we all rely on it, but why does it work? And so the point is, it works, and why does it work? And so I'll explain some principles that made that possible from different areas. Then I'll actually point out that there are actually multiple collective intelligences, so not one particular method, but numerous methods, and just exploring some of them, but clearly I cannot do all of them. And then I'll move on actually from collective intelligence to collective creativity, which is a different, you know, is related also in the world of knowledge, but the different rules apply there as well, and I'll focus on some of those. I may squeeze it a bit, and then I move on, say, you know, how did that bring us in a way to artificial intelligence? So show some of these transition points, and then ask the question, so now that we know AI is here, does that mean collective intelligence is obsolete? And then kind of what's the future? Okay, it's always risky to predict the future, but hey, why not, right? Okay. Okay, don't worry, we'll just use the mouse here. Oh, none of this works. Okay, so just click here.
No, there you go.
Okay, we are good. All right. Some of you may remember this. This is 1999, so we dial back over 20 years. The promise of the internet. It was a fantastic time, you know. For though if you are among the earlier career colleagues here or PhD students, the internet is not that old, right? And so we really World Wide Web 1993, and some of you may say, I wasn't even born in 1993. 1999, the Clue Train Manifesto came out, and you can find this book online. It's fantastic. It essentially formulated some new truths that were derived from the existence of an internet where people could not just read, but also contribute, the read-write web. Okay, and so this Clue Train Manifesto by some venerable people in the business described. So they put out these theses about what's now true in the world. Markets are conversations. They focus very much on the relationship between business and customer. The internet is enabling conversation among human beings that were simply not possible in the area of mass media, where it was one-to-many communications, right? These knowledge conversations are enabling powerful new forms of social organization and knowledge exchange. People in network markets have figured out that they get far better information and support from one another, the collective, than from the vendors. And the network market knows more than companies do about their own products. You know, one of the key trigger points was the IBM example. At the time, IBM was making computer chips, processors for IBM computers, and at the time they had a central processing unit. That's the main processor, and they had something which was called a math coprocessor that focused on just some mathematics. And the thing was, IBM came out with this next version, the 387 it was called at the time, and surprisingly, some people found out it miscalculated. So on certain operations, this math coprocessor did wrong. And at the time, so people wrote to IBM, and IBM would say, you know, it happens 1 in a million years or something like that. But then, so here now came the power of the internet, and people were starting to share this. And others said, yes, I've observed it as well. I replicate your problem. And so the power of the internet, of these voices in the chat rooms, convinced IBM then to change its computer architecture, its processor architecture. And so this was one victory of the crowd through its knowledge and sharing against the big company, in this case, IBM. It was one of the dramatic examples. And there are, of course, numerous others. At the time, you know, around 2000, lots of these knowledge networks came about, consumer networks and so on, chat rooms where people shared ideas. And this was suddenly empowering people by knowing a lot more. And there are also self-help networks. We see that again today. So people with illnesses sharing their knowledge, and or people, you know, in Hong Kong, people who want to get married. So they had this big wedding website because, you know, if you want to get married, you have to learn something about, you know, your wedding party and photos and so on. So they would bring you through this journey. It was one of the most successful internet sites in Hong Kong at the time. So this was the first time we saw really the collective doing smart things together. And as you can see, so then described also in narrative form in publications. Now, dialing forward to 2023, you see this picture, and where are we now? And this actually, I created this picture by telling Midjourney, the AI software, it's kind of generative AI, Midjourney, please create a realistic photo of Joe Biden and Kim Jong-un sitting together on a beach near sunset drinking Mai Tais. So this, of course, a completely fake picture, and with, you know, you say it's not perfect reality, but it's, you know, it's pretty good, and we can probably do better. And so I think the interesting thing that we see, I describe very roughly a scene, and then, you know, the generative AI fills in, which is also quite interesting. But what we're seeing is, oh, wow, we have moved in like 20-something years quite a bit, and can now generate actually what some might consider then fake news or unreliable information, where previously the premise was the internet, quote unquote, sets us free with all this transparent and good knowledge that we have from the collective. So here we are now, right? So where is this? And so with this week, I motivate really my journey by saying, so let's start out then with understanding the power of the collective intelligence and see where it takes us. Quick definition: collective intelligence is a form of intelligence that emerges from the collaboration and sometimes competition, but usually collaboration, of many individuals. Collective intelligence appears in a wide variety of forms of consensus decision-making, bacteria, animals, humans, and computers. I'm, of course, focusing on humans. It arises from the aggregation of fragmented knowledge of multiple people whose knowledge arises from independent sources, shaped by individual acquisition and transformation. And then IT enables collective intelligence by dramatically reducing the cost of communicating, aggregating, and sharing of knowledge over distance and across time. What I'm saying is collective intelligence existed all the time, you know, and I remember that from my early years and even from my later years, when you saw a shop with a long line in front of it, they must have been selling something good, right? If it's lunchtime at the university and you don't know where the cafeteria is, where are all the people going? So we know it's kind of some form of collective intelligence by following the crowd in their decision making. So this has always existed. What's the difference? Well, as I point out here, when IT comes into play, it's not just 5 people or 10 people in my vicinity. No, I can now draw on a huge number of individuals and their insights and bring them together instantaneously. So it's communication cost 0. So it means I can bring in many. And then aggregation costs, kind of tallying it all up, also goes to 0. And that is really where the power of IT, of course, comes to play and makes this. So we turns this into magic. Here an example, football pick'em, and this is an old example. I mentioned this, so I go through a journey. Predicting the results of NFL football games. And so there used to be, if you went online about 10-something years ago, that was called football pick'em or college football and NFL football pick'em, which really pitted the masses, all of us online, against some experts. And so the way it worked was the masses would give their guesses on who's going to win in football on the next weekend, or next weekend, or whenever the teams played. And this information was then given to these experts, and then the experts could also give up their guesses, and then it would compare who was doing better, the crowd or the experts. And think about the situation. So the experts get all the crowd information, their own insights, and then have to make their guesses. Now the question is, who's going to win this game? The crowd. Yes, and this is really wow, right? How can this happen? So here we are seeing, we are at the end of one season, I think 2009 season, but it's played out year after year after year for several years. And so this is one of the experts. These experts, usually sports reporters or former coaches or something like that. 157 guessed right, 83 guessed wrong throughout the season. 159 guessed right, 81 wrong. 162 right, 78 wrong. Really pretty good. Collective intelligence, 165 right, 75 wrong. And so this information is available to all of them when they make their guesses. Okay, so you could say, well, if I'm an expert, I should be at least beating this one, so to speak. This is my baseline, right? But apparently not. And this happened several years. So, and then they stopped this. Now we have the fantasy leagues, which is kind of the evolution of that, but not anymore. So showing the experts off as performing at a less strong level than the collective does. Of course, I can see the point. If you are the expert and you see these collective guesses, if you just copy what the collective does, no good. So you have to differentiate. But then once you differentiate yourself, you may get it wrong. And as you can see in this case, they all got it wrong more often than the collective did. So quite remarkable. Now we may ask ourselves, how come that the unwashed masses, so all of us, know more about football than those sports writers, right? And that is really the key question. And I'll explain it a little bit, and then I give you a deeper example which illustrates it a little bit more. But think about it. If, let's say if it's college football teams, all of you may know about your Memphis college football team than these guys. And if if the quarterback, we had a hangover just before the game, you will know. And then you can instantly say, oh, this lowers our chance of winning. And if it was a toss-up, you may give it the L, right? And they may not know this because it's very localized information that you have, and you can respond on that in your local circle. And because we have these local pockets of expertise, they can shine in such an aggregation over the entirety of the system. But I illustrated a little bit further. Yes.
For then the role of bias. Like, I think that my college football team is the best, and then I don't really think about how their quarterback is better than my quarterback or whatever, and then that plays a factor into how I assess whether or not my team will win.
This is one of the killer questions, right? Because everybody is a fan, and so they always they have this optimism, right? So and which clearly it's biased, but I may call it optimism. And so it's you might say in general, it may be so big, balanced by the other team's optimism. So everybody's like overvaluing. So they may cancel each other out, right? You and the fans of the other team, and then others who are more neutral point of view, carry the day with information, but not the bias. But bias is clearly always an issue. And I forgot whether the crowd was incentivized to give their best guess rather than their optimistic guess, which I would assume you get something if you're a high scorer. And that's, for example, in prediction markets, which some of you may have heard of, it's also an interpretation and implementation of collective intelligence. That's like a stock market for ideas, and there you get rewarded for guessing right. So there is value actually for rewarding people for giving their best guess rather than their wishful guess. Yeah, really an important issue.
Still, experts are biased.
And experts are biased too, yes. Absolutely. Plus, so they live in their own bubble in a way, right? And so that is what you might describe as bias. And so, plus, it's really so much harder for them to get all that information from the various places, right? They really they know the overall scene so well, but then the specifics of the day of that particular game not so well, right? But let me dive into a second example, which takes it further. An example that many of you knew, the millionaire game. Who wants to be a millionaire? Played in over 200 regions in the world, everywhere. And so I guess, wherever you come from, you have seen probably a version of this game. The way it goes is you have here the expert. So the expert on some area, some subject area, gets asked questions, and the difficulty increases, and with it, more money. And so if you get the answer right, the answer is typically you have a question, there are 4 viable answers, and you have to pick A, B, C, or D. And if you get it right, you move to the next level. If you get it wrong, you're out. So it's kind of a tough decision because it's up or out. So you kind of, and if the expert doesn't know, they have 3 lifelines. They're called lifelines. One of them is ask the audience. Now here you might say, if that person is an expert and the others are there, and so an audience non-experts, why should they even listen to that audience, right? But so, the audience is in the room and they have all these clickers, and they click, and then the expert can decide whether they follow the audience answer. And I'll illustrate a little bit more. So I already ran through, I think, no, I didn't run through this. I have some other criteria. I'll go back to this once more. Let me just move on. Asking the audience. So here you have the expert, and the question is about the 3 tenors. Many of you will have heard about the 3 tenors, as 3 famous singers. And then the question is, which of these was not one of the 3 tenors? Luciano Pavarotti, Andrea Bocelli, Jose Carreras, and Placido Domingo. And now so if the expert doesn't know, they should be really knowing that's if they're an expert. But if they don't know, now they can ask the audience, okay? And so here's how and the audience, and this is now where I illustrate a little more. The audience members may know something, or they have certain rules. They may not have perfect knowledge, but they may have certain rules by which they operate. For example, someone may say, one of the tenors was a big man. I think Pavarotti was big. The 3 tenors were quite old. That means I have to eliminate the young one in there. One of the names started with a C. That so Pavarotti you may or may not. Bocelli is blind. I don't think the tenors included a blind singer. So someone may know this. One of them was a Spaniard. I don't know, maybe that's by name. Andrea as a woman's name, all tenors were men. This would be false information because in Italy, Andrea is a man's name. Okay, so, but people may have right or wrong rules. But incomplete knowledge lets the audience not necessarily guess the right one or pick the right one, but eliminate those who they consider unlikely. And this is where we come to our point. This is where the magic lies. So consider the following. I have, let's say, here just 6 members of the audience. So these are 6 audience members who all have clickers. And let's say, look at both Agnes and Alfred. Oops. Let me see something. Okay, so here's what we're looking at. So Agnes and Alfred both know it's not. So Carreras and Domingo are wrong answers. Okay, that's what they know. So they rule out, I shouldn't vote for Carreras or Domingo. So for them, it's either Pavarotti or Bocelli. And so if Agnes doesn't know, is it A or B, she has to kind of flip a coin. And let's say she flips a coin and says, okay, I think it's Bocelli. And Alfred, no, also it's not C or D, so it has to flip the coin between A and B, flips the coin, and always picks Pavarotti, which is the wrong choice, right? Bob and Betty both know it's either Bocelli or Carreras, and they rule out A choice and D choice. So they say it's one of the others. So Bob may pick B, and Betty may pick C, Carreras. Celia and Chris know it's not A, it's not C, so they think it's either B or D, and then they, once again, they cannot decide, so they each flip a coin. So what does it mean when we tally this all up? A gets 1 check mark out of 6, 1 in 6. B gets 3 check marks out of 6. C gets 1 check mark out of 6. D gets 1 check mark out of 6. And in the statistics now, it's suddenly, as you see the results, the tally coming up, oh, 16% of the audience think it's A. 50% of the audience think it's B. 16% of the audience think it's C, and 16% think it's D. So who should I pick? B, right? And notice, I said 50% of the audience think it's B. It's 100% of the audience think it's maybe B, 50% chance. So that's really what the collective does. All of the collective thinks there's a 50% chance it's the B, but that shows up as 50% B. And so then how it goes, so in online, in the electronic medium, it goes like people give their votes, and then the electrons come out like this. And notice in this case, the audience was also quite undecided. B got 40% of the votes. That was Bocelli. That's the right answer. C got 34. That was, I think, Carreras, and so on. But if I follow, no, should I follow the audience? You know, if you say, oh, I know the answer, yes. But 40% chance, not that much different to 34, right? Yes, I should follow. Absolutely. So 40%, and in fact, the audience is right 92% of the time. Whoa, 90%, over 90% of the time, so 92%. So following the audience recommendation gives the player better than 90% chance of picking the right answer. Almost unbelievable. And it's really, and this is an audience of kind of 50 people or something like that. So it's really a dramatic finding. And, you know, if we look at it statistically, in terms of statistical significance, think of it, let's say I had not a 50-person audience, but a 100-person audience. And if I have 100 people or 100 people and 4 choices, statistically, 25, 25, 25, 25. So if my most likely one is 25, that means equal distribution, statistically insignificant, I don't know whom to pick. But if I move on and I get out of 100 votes, 34 votes say it's Bocelli, I'm at 3%, 3.7% significance based on chi-square test. So I only need a little more than 25. Once I move from 25 to 34 to 100, saying it's Bocelli, statistically significant already. Wow. So actually I need some support from the collective, and with that revealing what's likely the answer. So that's where in a collective we need, yes, so we have large masses, but we need a little bit of difference between signal and noise, and then an aggregate that will carry. It's kind of a dramatic, really dramatic outcome. And over and over and over again, right? So this is really like a strong finding. And let me go back once more to what I mentioned, or what I didn't mention then earlier. So what happens here? What does the crowd do? The crowd has, and this is very important, ability to eliminate. They tossed out certain unlikely choices. And they may have partial theories, right? So they can, oh, one's a Spaniard, so someone with a non-Spanish name, you know, we cannot eliminate or something like that. In the audience also, in this case, we needed replication because we needed the two A's, one picks A and one picks B if they cannot decide. So we need replication so that random effects go out and then the signal carries above the noise. We need, you know, and this I'll illustrate just a little bit from now, process under repetition and error correction, namely so many eyeballs already illustrated, and this I come to later, namely role differentiation. So the top points we already saw, a few other points we just see a little bit later. Okay, now interestingly is of course when can the collective actually operate this way? And the point is, this is a very uninteresting point, namely high knowledge, low difficulty. Because if it's what's 1 + 1? Everyone knows the answer. That's a high knowledge, low difficulty. We don't need collective intelligence for that. So collective intelligence, it makes no contributions for that, right? If it's really difficult, nobody can find the answer. The collective cannot make any difference because nobody knows the answer. And so the typical example is, what's the outcome of the coin flip? You know, if I have an audience, 100 people, 50% will say heads, 50% will say tails, which means I have no information, right? Because they just cannot tell. So there has to be some knowledgeable information in there, and the action is really, oops. There should be a build really, but apparently the build doesn't show up with this clicker. So there is an area when we have relatively high fractional knowledge, that's when the crowd meaningfully can contribute. Here, it's low fractional knowledge, people know relatively little, the noise is quite high, and so the value of the collective deteriorates a little bit. So that's what we need to take on, and we see this on this curve. Which brings me actually to my next example. And let's see where, here the build works. Interesting. Okay. Brittleness of the collectives. So do the collectives get it wrong? As I already pointed out here, there is this curve, right? Well, we asked the collective. So this is one of the studies that Ah-Young So and I did in 10 years ago. We asked in our collective 500 people, and we asked them essentially, what's the weight of water? So, and we asked them, what's the weight of 250 ml, 1 cup? So 1 cup of water, milk, gasoline, gold, and air. And then looked at what was the mean answer in terms of given by the crowd, standard deviation, look at the true value, the standard deviation over the mean, and the mean over the true. These two are kind of quality measures for the collective in a way, okay? And so here are the interesting parts. Water, so the crowd, what's 1 cup of water, 250 mils? The right answer is 250. The crowd collectively guesses 236. Very good, right? So this is kind of, people know what water weighs roughly, so to speak, right? Standard deviation was 182. Which means the standard deviation over mean is less than 1, and the mean to true is essentially, we're very close to 1. People know what water weighs, so we are in the high knowledge zone. Milk, you might say even better, right? So which is interesting. So on average, people think milk weighs more than water, which is actually, I think it's a little bit the opposite. But it's so marginal. We put the same thing. As you can see, essentially the results are identical. Now comes gasoline. And you ask yourself, many of us may think gasoline, there's weak energy in gasoline. That must weigh more, right? And this is what our crowd thought, 260. But for those of you know, it's kind of it's not. What 0.8 or 0.75 is the weight. So the true answer is 185 grams. And now we see the standard deviation actually going up. So the crowd's getting more varied, and the crowd's getting in more wrong in terms of mean to true. Here where they were pretty much 1-to-1. Here now they're over guessing by quite a bit. Now we come to gold. So people have much less experience. And this is fractional knowledge goes significantly down. How much is a cup of gold, right? Most of us, you know, cup of gold, when do we touch it, right? True answer is pretty much 5 kilograms, 10 pounds, roughly, 10 pounds and change. But the audience thinks pretty much only half of that. And as you can see, the standard deviation explodes, right? So people don't know anymore. So this is very fractional knowledge in a way breaks down. And so this ratio goes far away from 1, you know, up or down goes far away. And the standard deviation just explodes, right? So as you can see, and then air, you know, this is really, people don't know what air weighs. So, and as you can see, this is absolutely, so a cup of air, 68 grams was the guess. And so, and we already were kind, I think, by saying it's 1 gram, it's less than that. And you see kind of, it's here the numbers, people have no experience on that. And that's where the collective essentially falls flat, okay? Which is kind of, oh, yes, collectives can do well when they have so big knowledge they can draw on. But if not, no good. And so we, in fact, based on that, built what we call the collective intelligence quotient. So again, kind of, because we thought, how can we describe it? And our thinking was, well, if we compare individual errors people make to the collective error, and it works like this. So think of this: we sum up all the individual errors squared, kind of, and we compare this to the squared collective errors, how far the collective is away from the mean, and we square them both so that they match up, and calculate the ratio. And then what we found, and this is quite interesting, on problems that are easy, so this is difficulty, this is easy to difficult. If the problem's easy, this ratio is, you know, nothing pretty much. So meaning the collective adds nothing to the equation. As I said, you know, if the answer is easy, everybody knows I don't need a collective. If the question is really hard, the collective has nothing because nobody knows, and so everybody's guessing, and so nothing. But if the question is middle hard, and so we have fractional knowledge, that's where we see the collective actually contribute, and that's where we see this interesting curve of collective intelligence arising. So that's was one of our findings we published, and you know, I have my references in the end. You know, we saw later some others replicating this information, but obviously not surprising. You know, in a way we were surprised. It turned out so quite dramatic in terms of our deliberation. And what we extracted from that is some principles, namely, given enough people, those that are random guessing will cancel out each other, error reduction. You know, we all understand it from statistics. But given enough people, there will be some with fractional knowledge that raise the probability of correct choice above the noise, as long as there's a non-standard knowable outcome. So no coin flip. The reach of the internet and low cost of data gathering and aggregation enables sourcing large crowds and finding unlikely answers. And that's where the power comes in. And collectives works best when the difficulty levels that you just saw result in knowledge fragmentation and incomplete answers. That's kind of when they can get to work. Okay, I gave you one example, which was to make eliminating choices. That's one type of collective intelligence, but collectives can do a lot more. And I'll illustrate a little bit what other elements we need to make this all work. And so my example here is, I first illustrated from industrial processes. What you see here is actually these people, they are making electronic equipment, and that's in Thailand. So keyless entry units, CD player units, automotive displays. And so they make, you know, I wouldn't be able to build a CD player, you know, and I like to build, work on my car and so on. But this is, as we know, electronics, building fine electronics is quite difficult. Keyless entry units. So these people must be quite some experts to do that, right? We must think. But actually, we all know the answer. They're actually originally farm hands from Thailand and just trained very much so in these small processes on something which is like an assembly line. And in industrial processes, we know very well, even if I have not so well, so high expertise people, but I give them a narrow enough task, they can learn this task really well. It's well structured, it's coordinated, and then they can develop micro expertise, especially when they have to do it over and over and again. So they have good micro expertise. And then I put it all together, aggregated. And so unskilled people together perform a high skilled task in aggregate. And that's, we know that from industrial processes. Seems like a good idea if we apply that also to knowledge processes, isn't it? I give you another example. I illustrate a little bit. If you have children or nephews or other things, you may know the answer. So there's the little boy or girl, and you go to them in the afternoon and say, make up your room, clean up your room. You're saying, you know, yeah, I see you already smiling. You come back an hour later, and this is how the room looks like. No action, right? I gave the instruction. What went wrong here? You know, what are kids doing? Now, if you had given the instruction, put the books on the shelf, put the clothes in the wardrobe, micro task, right? So give instruction for each of those micro tasks, which you describe. Put the pen in your backpack, and then you say, and then you, little boy or girl does it, and then you say, and from now on, we call this entire process, we call this thing make up your room. And from now on, we agree, if I say make up a room, it really means a program, which is, and then you do it. And so from now on, so I've converted now this what was a complex task, unfulfillable, into easy micro instructions, just so we labeled. And if we want collective intelligence to work, we may have to do the same thing. General decomposition, even complex processes become actionable. Not that complex, right? And that brings me to the wiki travel results. You know, I'm a big fan of wikis. You may have seen one work on Wikipedia. And, you know, if some of you may know, we all, in this case, I'm using here wiki travel. I talk a little bit of Wikipedia, but then talk more about wiki travel because the example works very well here. Wikipedia was an enormous phenomenon when it came out. Early 2000s, in the beginning, it was like everybody was saying, oh, it can never work. And I don't know how you know, whether you know it started. I think at lunch we talked about that. Two people, Jimmy Wales, Larry Sanger, came together and they want to create a new encyclopedia, the Newpedia, to compete against the other encyclopedia, free encyclopedia online. And so they hired, quote unquote, hired some experts, write us the encyclopedia. A year later, they had some like 18 articles or so, you know, it didn't work, right? So, okay, this project is not going anywhere. And then they approached these experts and said, okay, here we have a new idea. There's this software, it's called a wiki. And first, you write a dirty article, or this start a dirty article, and everybody can kind of throw stuff at there. Think of it like a Google Doc, so throw your stuff in there. And then we later make it good, okay? And so they saw people throwing stuff at this wiki thing, and here they're thinking, okay, later then we extract it and make it good. And it was already good, okay? So here comes a war. And in the first year of Wikipedia, 1,000 articles compared to, you know, dual digits before. And then it exploded. And as you know now, Wikipedia now has probably 6 million entries, something like that. So somehow this model, so we worked in giving a process by which people could create something. Wikipedia, of course, has been the poster child, but others, based on the same principle, came about, and I'll illustrate the principle here a little bit more. And that is here, this is Wiki Travel. Think of it like Wikipedia for just traveling, right? And so this is the Wikipedia travel entry for, I think, Paris. And some of you may or may not know, every Wikipedia actually carries that button up there, which is called edit. So you and I can edit. Which means it's a read-write web. And if I have a little bit of knowledge that I want to add, I can do so. But oftentimes I may feel, how can I contribute to such a monolith, to an encyclopedia, or to, I may get something wrong and actually deteriorate the knowledge. Micro instructions, remember? Micro instructions. So actually, this Wiki Travel is very cleverly designed in that it's very much, in a way, deconstructed. First of all, it's going deconstruct by location, and then each of the pages has see, do, buy, eat, drink, sleep. And you might say, I know nothing about Paris other than there is this small, great restaurant on Rue something, something, and I want to share that with the world. So you press eat, press edit, and you add your little bit of knowledge at that particular logic, and thereby you add to the total pool. Or you remember having flown in there, and then you can, and so by structuring the task, actually in this case, by structuring the artifact cleverly, I structure the task and therefore allow the collective to operate. Essentially, so we're implementing micro instruction inside the structure, which is quite clever. And of course, we know this has worked. Some people talk about stigmergy in this context, so setting signs. And that's really instructions made operational without having user interaction all the time. Fantastic example. So how has it, so I described just one element, structure and decomposition. Everyone can edit. Everybody can revert if it's something false in there. So you can turn back to an earlier version. If you haven't tried it out, look at your favorite wiki one of these days. So you can, what did this page look like 3 days ago? And then you can, if you want to, revert to it. Writing below the line. If you believe something's wrong there and you don't want to just edit, you can make comments about the wiki and then let others implement those later. Contributors can edit anonymously or identified, so you can leave your footprint there. And this is something very interesting, namely, how do we know the wiki is right? That was also this challenge, right? Here's Britannica, and here's that damn Wikipedia. How do we know they're right? Interesting enough, there's two counts. One is the read count. So, you can look up how many people have read this, and if they read it and decided not to press the edit button, essentially they gave a vote for the validity of this page. So essentially we vote with our feet about the validity of this knowledge. You might say, or people may have been quote unquote lazy and didn't want to change anything or so, but it's just like when I mentioned earlier, long line in front of the department store, there must be something good there, right? It's the footprints. And then they have some other logic called the neutral point of view. I didn't want to leave it out, but I'm not going to get into too much detail. So a read count, and then there's also an edit count. If you see a lot of edits on a wiki, if you go to the edit count, you can look at that as well. So if a wiki has had like 500 edits or so, the chance that it's a page is wrong goes down dramatically. They stabilize pretty much after like 25 or so actions in there, and so then they come. You can imagine, like if you edit your paper, after a few rounds of editing, things stabilize quite a bit, and that's the same logic here. So we see, and point is, so wiki collective intelligence is a different type of collective intelligence that we see when we eliminate choices. Here we truly add together fragments of knowledge in this holistic big thing. Interesting enough, and this here you see some a research study that's Yates, Wagner, and Myshak in 2010. I think this is JAIS. I think this is where we published this, we recognized in such collectives, there's not everybody the same thing. A lot of people are good in adding knowledge, so I know a little bit, but then we frequently also need people whom we call knowledge shapers. And they take this whole thing and they actually, they don't know much about the content, but they know how to reshuffle things and make this and build, restructure what has been written so that it makes better sense. Many of you are faculty here, and sometimes you're in a classroom, graduate students, and they all are experts in their field, right? Because that's what they have done already, like 10, 15 years. You have MBAs, they know their area. And so what do you bring in as faculty to the game? They are the knowledge adders oftentimes, and you as faculty do that. You shape their knowledge so that out of what everybody says comes a meaningful pattern of knowledge that they can take home, and they have learned something in the lesson. We are, as faculty, frequently, we take on that role, which requires a higher level of understanding, seeing patterns where others don't see them, and being able to deconstruct and reconstruct. And then there are the knowledge adders who just toss a lot of knowledge at that. And that's really what we bring in a way as knowledge shapers to the collective intelligence proposition that we call the classroom, right? With undergrads, maybe a little bit different. We produce a lot more of the knowledge, but in the graduate student classroom, that's oftentimes our mode of operations, if you think about it. And we see these are clear roles. So people don't usually do both. They kind of they sort themselves out in one or the other category based on kind of what their personal makeup is. What we see, the aggregation and distribution, wow, time flies. Aggregation and distribution of collective intelligence. We have the wiki model, which I'll describe. There's also, I would call YouTube in a way, it's also a form of collective intelligence. So, and you all really, when you think about it, it's like, yes, the nuggets of knowledge are the individual videos. And we all well know that not all of them, especially the advisory, like how to do this or that, they are not all as best advice. And you all will go like, how many likes, how many views? We all know the game, right? We all know how many footprints have been there, and we use that logic. So individual small contributions curated by page view statistics and server algorithm, which feeds you what you really need. You looked at some and say, to me also TikTok model, and I think the TikTok model is an enormous model. It works a little bit like the YouTube model. The contributions are more micro, which is kind of quite powerful because so you don't invest too much if you in not liking something, watching and not liking it. And there, normally if you read an article or so, you read it longer. So in the TikTok model, you can quickly swipe, right? You do a few seconds, I didn't like it, swipe away. So your swiping essentially is a form of curation. This is no good, swipe it away, right? I like it, I keep on swiping, or swipe right, give me more of that. And as you know, the TikTok algorithm is so tight-fitting in terms of preference, it gives you more and more of what you liked, what you swiped, so fitting to what you think is valid knowledge in a way. So from that perspective, the TikTok model has such an aggressive, and I think it's, of course, an AI-based, machine learning-based algorithm to do that. It's quite dramatic. So we outshines the YouTube model, which is much more sloppy in that. And of course, the wiki model operates on a much looser algorithm. Okay, quantitative problems. And I may go quickly over the quantitative problems. When we did our study, 500 people, we asked them this question: if all poor people in the world would give you $1 of their annual earnings, how much money would you have? That's a pretty difficult question. And we saw it, in terms of the variance and the answers, how many people gave us an answer, how many people were guessing. Really not an easy answer, right? If I set over and see the knowledge shaper, and I'm now the knowledge shaper, I say, okay, I'm not shaping just your result, but I'm shaping the problem-solving process. What's the percentage of poor people in the world? Can you give me some guess of percentage of poor people? You don't have to do it right now, but this I can probably do, right? Let me say 10% poor people in the world. What's the total world population? At least some in the room, you know, collectively we know what's the world population. You know, let's say 8 billion or something like that. What's the definition income of poverty? And we may know that. The World Health Organization statistics, $2 per day, something like that. So we can make a, and what's 1% there? You know, that I can also do. I can do a little bit of math. If I can do all this, and I can do this, I have my answer. But in a way, I needed someone to structure this for me. So the knowledge shaper who described, and that's, once again, oftentimes our faculty role, right? We help the collective to understand what it knows. We give it patterns. If we break it down, suddenly now the collective can actually answer questions that couldn't answer. Quite something to notice. And now suddenly, yeah, this is doable. So this just shows it. And then the results become quite more workable. I'll leave that example behind. I don't need this. So this is okay. Collective creativity. I point. So we talked now about some mechanisms, and the last one will be so we collective intelligence that are passed by was collective intelligence through algorithm addition. You know, some collectives work really by, you know, part of an algorithm, part of a regression model. I know the another part of the regression model. So if it's for real estate, you think real estate pricing is based on square footage. You may think it's based on number of rooms in the house or something. Then if I put the two together, it's square footage and number of rooms. I have a better model. And if someone else says, yeah, and location, and I have an even better model. And someone else. So if people with fractional models can aggregate their linear model, it becomes a better linear model or non-linear model. Okay, but I don't want to dwell too much on this. Collective creativity. I want to say a few words about collective creativity because it is so different, and I want to highlight that. You know, when we talk about creativity, we all know creativity is something special, unique, and so on. But the real elements for creativity, so it's something that's truly creativity is transformational. It changes the world. For example, you know, early computers, they changed the world. Microchip changed the world. It's something, you know, thereafter new venues open, all different. Generative AI changes the world. So that's so creative. And true creativity is germinal. So something much bigger can grow out of that. And so, for example, out of simple web pages, like you remember, some of you may remember Netscope, grew out so many web applications, read wide webs, e-business, and so on. So a lot of simple web pages became a whole new industry. So that's really, in a way, creativity has, yeah, it's new, it's useful, but it also, when it's real creativity, it transformed the world. Now, collective intelligence, as I described, is so I aggregate and kind of come to a group consensus. Creativity doesn't live in the consensus. Creativity lives at the endpoints, right? So the outliers, I'm looking for the outliers. So if I look at collective creativity, I really want the collectively to generate outliers. And this is like, and so why do I have two sides? These are the original but really bad ideas. These are the original and really good ideas, right? So both can be highly original, but I want to be likely there. Now, so the collective operates on a different basis, namely, I want it for its uniqueness, but I also want to see patterns. And this is, so the patterning ability of what the collective says is quite important. But before I illustrate that a little bit further, I wanted to talk about there, in a way, when we talk about collective creative, or when we talk about creativity, we may want to actually differentiate between two forms, and one I might describe as deductive, and the other I describe as new to the world. And you might say, what do you mean by deductive creativity? Deductive creativity would be something like, you know all the rules already and all the facts, but you haven't applied them all. So you haven't made all the deductions. And so by cranking through your search space, you find something new. And I illustrate like this. So chess players, right? They always face a situation. So you have your chessboard, and now what's my next move? Well, I have to look into the future. If I do this move, what will my opponent do? And what will I do then? And so essentially, by finding the move, if you're, let's say, if you are here, move one, and you're saying, okay, I want to move ahead and kind of think of a future world. If you think of, if I do this move, my opponent may be A, B, C, or D. And then you have to figure all of them out. And then if they do A, and then I do this. And then if they do B, and then I do this. And so you have very quickly have this combinatorial explosion, you can imagine, right? So if you look one move ahead, it might take you 1 minute. 2 moves ahead, 4 minutes. So it explodes. So very quickly, you cannot do this anymore. And as you know, in a chess game, you have just very little time. So looking into the future is really quite costly, quite, cognitively enormously hard. And so to have an idea of how the game might unfold here is really enormous. So this requires some imaginary insight. You have never seen this move before, but you somehow are able, against all processing limitations, to see this move. And the famous example, and this is why I picked this one, is really this was the game Bobby Fischer against Robert Byrne. It's a famous game where, so it's move 11, and Fischer sees a checkmate in move 26. It's like 13 moves ahead. And yeah, and at move 20, the commentators, who are grandmasters, saying, oh, Fischer has lost. So, he's lost. 21, his opponent gives up. Everybody's stunned. And Fischer is really upset because he wanted to play this out and show how smart he was. But the opponent already saw, I have no more chance, 5 moves later. But he saw this so early on. So he somehow had this, and he won the brilliance prize for that. Essentially, so the chess world saying he could see something. He was so, because processing-wise, he couldn't have done it. He was able to see this outcome when the other party could not see it, and the other party, grandmaster as well, right? So stunning. This is so, you may argue, one form of intelligence, and that's where we compete really so with machines, because this is cranking speed, and our clock speed is like 10 hertz, maybe. If you're really lucky, yours is 20 hertz, right? So, but brutal. So one form of creativity, and I call it deductive, because all the rules are given in the game. Essentially, you could do, that's what chess players do, right? So they kind of play this out, play so many parties, play all the famous chess games they have seen, so that they are ready for so many variations, and yet they still have to think sometimes when they see the surprise. And so Bobby Fischer, that was the surprise, and he won. Now, when I go to collective creativity, and we're looking now something for new to the world or something, kind of coming up with something that we haven't seen before, I give an example, and an example of a problem, and then we can explore a little bit more about that. And the problem is, most of us don't experience that much if we fly through a regular fare. But this has been a problem that has been sort of vexing airlines for a long time. Namely, people book flights, and if they pay full fare, then if they don't show up for the flight, no problem. Their seat stays empty, but they get a refund, full refund. For most of us, if you don't show up, $150 penalty or something like that. But if you pay full fare, you don't show up, no penalty. If you pay full fare business class, first class, that seat's empty. That $10,000 seat, if you're flying internationally, stays empty. Big loss for the airline, right? And there may have been someone who wanted this and couldn't get it. So when we did the study with our, my colleague and I, on computer-supported creativity, we asked our subjects, give us some ideas on how to solve this problem. And what we then see is, just as I described earlier, most of it bunched to the middle. So they have lots of patterns of similar answers. Lots of people say, oh, we should penalize these people who don't show, like pay them, let them pay money, or we should give them incentive to show up, kind of lots of, and then we see lots of variations of that, or we should use planes, which are, some are bigger, some are smaller, and so on. And then, you know, some, and that's the outliers, they give us the golden answers, right? So that's the answers, well, that are really different. But these, you know, that's where here now we have the collective. Many give us patterned answers, not so useful. Some give us unique answers, quite useful. But even from these patterns, if we have shapers, help us shape the knowledge, they can probably draw out from something. Okay, you talked about incentive. Can you give me a new incentive? Not one of those incentives that everybody knows. Can you come up with something new? You talked about penalties, charging people more. Are there other penalties you can use? So good shapers of the problem can drive the collective from answers they have given through this patterning process to come up with new and better ideas. So collective creativity looks for the unique ones, but can use pattern answers to also come up with something new. And I'll move on this with quite some speed here. Just remind everyone, collective intelligence in the early days, and some of you may know, so if was actually already computer supported. The really early, you know, big impact University of Arizona, they built what they called group systems, so a software to support these collective problem solving and creativity processes. So, and you know, by today's standards, we say, oh my God, how simplistic or simple this was. Not simplistic, simple this was. People sit around the room, everybody has a computer, and they have facilitating software and a facilitating person. And say they would allow brainstorming, we do this all ourselves, and then they would allow this clustering that I just showed you for the patterns, and then the facilitator would come in, how else? And people could comment, they had an idea commenter, and could work on this and make, you know, essentially draw good answers out of a bunch of average answers. And that's what really made group systems in a way quite special, and this was widely used software. The Department of Defense, you know, came to Arizona all the time, and I think there are some folks here who have some relationship, or if you were, let's say, at some of the, you know, I think Arizona, Washington State, some of these places where they took this work further, you know very much about it. Exploration, so this idea generation, and then idea organization. So it always comes down to, first we generate knowledge, and then we also need to shape knowledge. And so we, by patterning this, we allow people now to see the pattern and then draw something new out of this pattern. And you heard me now speaking several times about patterns, right? And so this is kind of where we come to this zone of where we slowly come from collective intelligence to machine algorithms. So observation, we search for unique answers through reduction, chess example. Ordinary intelligence can be improved through process. And I pointed out the differentiation in collective creativity activities. So some focus on producing knowledge and some help with the process. But now we are moving on to the artificial. And I give you a simple example to start this out. You know, traditionally, when you applied, or when people applied for a credit card, that used to be a relatively manual process. The early days, okay? Not where you have you get like 20 offers in your mail for every day, but in the early days. So traditionally, you fill out on paper a credit card application, and that goes to a credit appraiser. And you have filled out something that's this long with answers, questions about your home, how long have you lived, and you know, lots and lots of questions. And then the appraiser will make a holistic assessment as a human being of whether you're deserving of that credit card. And 3 weeks later, you get a notification whether you guess you got it or you didn't, right? So this was the process. And so they were considering quantitative and qualitative data. And essentially what they're judging, can you pay back and are you willing to pay back? That's always the logic. Able and willing, right? And oftentimes, if you had asked them, they would say, no, I don't have a specific algorithm. I look holistically, yeah, because so many different scenarios. Some people are really strong on the finances, but you know, they have kind of their patterns from the past are not so good, or they just moved to the area. How do I know? They have a new job. They're not so solid. And then kind of saying, but the interesting point is they have no specific algorithm, but when we analyze their actions statistically, which is so kind of a patterning process, we actually see, yeah, they may have some, as if they have some rules that they cannot even voice them, you know, as a kind of tacit, but they seem to almost as if they follow some rules. And so then the question arises, if these people, while they cannot explain that they have some rules or patterns, but it looks like they have some, can we unearth what they're actually doing? And here's what's interesting. And here you see the example. This is from, as you can see, I grabbed this from, I think it's probably late 1960s, where they started reporting on the computers were just coming around and about credit appraiser performance. And so this is what you see is here, this curve. And this is when credit appraisers allow you or me to have a credit card, this is, we allow more and more people to have a card, okay? We allow more and more people to have a card, and this is bad decisions. So these people don't pay back. So what you want ideally is, yeah, you allow more and more people to have the card, but you keep your losses down. So a curve that is really low slope. Eventually you may have to hit this because if you give everybody a card, then there will be some losses. But so what you see is, you see the experts. These are the human experts, right? The human experts. And so you see this curve is pressed downward a little bit. So they allow, they are judges of risk. And so they judge well. So meaning they don't allow all the bad risks to come in. That's why this is curved like this. But the interesting point is, if we look at the decision-making, and then run a regression model. We create a regression model. We just look at their behavior and create a regression model from that behavior, and then let the regression model do the same job. The regression model, which is based on the human behavior, performs better than the humans. And I repeat that. The regression model, which is drawn from the decisions of the humans, performs better than the humans. So the bootstrapping, because it takes out all the noise, performs better than these individuals themselves. And that is, of course, where so suddenly now, whoa, you know, the linear regression model performs, or the machine learning model performs better than the individual. So I extract from these people who said, oh, I have no mathematical model. I extract a mathematical model, and that performs better. And suddenly we are there, right? Suddenly, so we let out the genie, and the genie does better decisions than we do, where we say, oh, you know, I have some compassion, or they just move there, but give them a chance or so. No, no, no. The regression model has no mercy, is neutral, and so on, and decides that way and performs better. And that's where you might say AI takes over, because as we know, linear regression is one of the many models of machine learning that we can use to draw patterns out of data, right? So linear regression, one model. Neural networks, another model. And I say a few words about neural networks. Logistic regression, decision trees, I grade them out saying I'm not looking at them. And so here, for example, you see, and I put this just as picture up, this is a neural network. And the neural network here is used to tell us what these things are. So the neural network thinks, oh, this is a car with 82% likelihood. So it's exactly, so it does some statistic prediction of what something is. Before it was, is it a good credit risk? What is this thing? And so also with some likelihood of what it is. This is that's the next step up, like vision recognition, but it's a huge step up. So a very typical example. So we see the first mechanism I showed you in the previous one, second mechanism of artificial intelligence here. So in vision recognition, neural networks. And if you have not seen neural networks, think about it like as follows. A neural network is like a formula, okay? And so single neuron, you have, so this is one processor, okay? And so copied from your brain. And this processor will give an output, like yes or no type output. But it will not say yes or no, it'll say 0 or 1 or something in between. And its functional curve is a sigmoidal, looks like an S-curve, as you see there up there. And so, and it gets 2 inputs. That's how this artificial neural networks works. And if the two signals with this algorithm that works between them gives me enough power, then the outcome comes to 1. If it's not enough power, it's 0. And if it's kind of in the middle, it's in the middle. I can train such a neural network by adjusting the formula that's in the middle to give me a specific outcome. So, okay, I can train it, but before I tell you about the training, oftentimes one neural network is absolutely primitive because it gives me 2 little inputs. So I may have to have more of these neurons in my network. So I have another layer here. So I have 2 here. One talks about the ability to pay and puts these inputs in here. And one talks about willingness to pay, ability and willingness or reliability to pay, and this here. And then this can grow, as we can imagine. And so then kind of consider factors of this. And these neural networks we train because we typically, and this is kind of, if you do this professionally, you have training sets. You know what the inputs are and you know the outputs you want to have. And then you kind of run this neuron through its paces. You give it certain inputs. You observe the outputs. If the inputs and the outputs deviate, then you tweak the algorithm and you run again. And so it's an iterative refinement till you get, for if it's 0 and 0 here, you know what the output you want. Namely, I want a 0 output. If it's 1 and 1, I want the 1 output, and then can kind of tune it. And so I train one of them, okay, and then it kind of can predict based on these, can give me a good answer. But the world is more complicated than this, especially in vision and other things. And then I end up with something that may look like this. Okay, so this is suddenly a big neural network. And it's the point is, they used to be quite small because they are very much processing intensive. So processing these networks and training them and then processing is really hard. The training is particularly hard. And you know, processes were slow, energy intensive, and complex. And suddenly, you know, with GPUs, graphical processing units, that's essentially the video cards repurposed in computers, suddenly the world was able to build enormous things like that. Not just a few layers and a few 100 or 1,000, no, millions, you know, 100 million. I think this is probably in the neighborhood where we are, of these neurons. And suddenly we have, we can make decisions of an enormous level. And so these things work on, so we train on prediction, we fine tune, and this is kind of this clever thing with these things. You can train them at first on the training set, like I just showed you a little bit, and then we fine tune for a specific use case. And that's what we see with these large language models that we have nowadays. We see them tuned, and they can suddenly do enormous things. Financial decision-making, that's pretty much easy. They can do vision, I showed the earlier example. And they can do, and this is what's the killer application now, content generation. Because what they actually do is they're still prediction models, but they predict so the outcome of the sentence, so or the outcome of the question, based on what they've seen before, the pattern between the inputs and the outputs. So suddenly we are using what used to be a quote-unquote simple pattern matching to pattern match now at this giant scale and with this enormous accuracy. And that is suddenly, this was this runaway success of these models. And there's, you know, there's a lot more in it, but I kind of keep it a little bit small. So large language models, you know, I asked the large language models here, so show a bit of example. The large language models like ChatGPT, they are these neural network models, and suddenly they can do things we didn't expect were possible. So I can ask a large language model about, give me answers to the airline no-show problems, okay? And I ask, give me 50 answers. When we ran the experiment in the 1990s with human subjects and computer supported, no single subjects would have given 50 such good answers. So we would have considered these answers in our test as one of the most creative subjects in our group. Wow, you know, to be noted. Not out of the world creativity, but you know, winner in our contest most likely. Stunning, okay? I asked ChatGPT, this was 3.5, if you collected, and I simplified the problem a little, couldn't solve the big one. If you collected $1 from every person on earth who earns less than 500 per year, how much money would you have? It could give me the answer and broke down the problem. Decomposition. Wow, you know, this is quite, so AI is now, this language model, how can it even decompose the problem, like a problem shaper, like what I described before, and making the problem dual, and then answers the question. So quite dramatic. And so comes up with a very reasonable answer. And then I ask it something, an out-of-the-world answer. Is the phenomenon of simultaneous invention related to quantum entanglement? So simultaneous invention is where, you know, we've seen over time someone in this country invent something and someone in the UK, the light bulb, roughly at the same time. And, you know, almost as they didn't have communication, but, you know, give or take the same year they invented. And someone in another country, in Germany, may invent the same thing. How is this possible, right? Have they had communication? Oh, you know, this is like 1870 or something, not much communication. So quantum entanglement is something, the quantum mechanics where particles seem to, over a large distance, seem to kind of correspond as if they are connected in some way. So these phenomena, not related at all. So I asked ChatGPT, you know, could they be related? And so ChatGPT gives me a very rational answer. A human being might be able to give me a more imaginative answer, saying, oh, they could be related, and then could sort of spin a yarn of how these two phenomena are related. That's where we see sort of a limit of the generative AI. Essentially, this is deductive process, whereas we as human beings, you can spin a yarn, so to speak, around it, and therefore come up with some new ideas. Yes? Yes, you may. Theorizing, exactly. So I can let my imagination go and formulate a theory, then based on that, have some hypothesis and then test this, right? So is there an action over distance, right? You put people in, I could test this, right? And then see if it's related. Yes?
Yeah, so another related thing, these days, the large language models, if you talk about reliability, where you ask it the same question in 2 different times, you get 2 different answers, especially if it is opinion related.
Yes.
So in this one, they put the, I mean, but that could be a boon or a bane. I mean, you can say it is creativity. I mean, because you're getting 2 different versions of the answer, you can combine both of them, and the human can access and get the best of the both worlds and combine them, right? So
good point. Yes, and you know, this is in fact, this is also the non-deterministic nature of the answer, right? This is quite astonishing. We were not used to that from our technology, right? So it's really something dramatic. But so, you know, because so the network can flip one way or the other way in a way, I think, on certain uncertainties, right? So when it's really a toss-up. Clearly we see, and good news, you know, we see limitations. I asked ChatGPT, this is, you know, for us as researchers, theorizing. How strong is the relationship between a person's intelligence and their carbon footprint? None of us will have so formulated this research question, right? But, oh, and actually it's quite meaningful chain of logic evolves to encounter, oh, something worth exploring. So even so in some theorizing, we get meaningful answers. So worth noting. And then I asked ChatGPT, of course, the ultimate question, which I wonder because is what this talk is about, will AI make collective intelligence obsolete? So when I asked ChatGPT 3.5, no, artificial intelligence will not make collective intelligence obsolete. Oh, I was very happy. And then I asked ChatGPT 4, not necessarily. I didn't like this particular answer. So, you know, just like half a generation later, and here goes my hope for collective intelligence. Not really, but so kind of interesting to see this. I'm coming close to the end, but not yet, because so pointing out AI predictions models, right? Trained on vast knowledge base. So they, you know, the entire open web is really quite dramatic. Good response in very short time. High verbal intelligence. I say a few more words about that. I think I have one more slide. Strong capability in task within a constrained language rule set. So any of us who knows about programming, you know, killer application, right? Software development for language models. Certain weaknesses, you know, they're always frozen, as you know. So you get the same set, which is in a way good. We can do some research on that. It's a conversational text-based model. They are actually relatively flat models, even though they look like they perform causal reasoning. And response is limited to knowledge contained within the corpus of the source data, this is another good news in a way for us, okay? And I'll say a few more words about this. They can derive a lot of stuff, but only from what's in there. And I was reminded, I was in Italy 2 weeks ago, and you know, Lake Como, and you know, I followed my Google Maps and so on, and suddenly it's wrong, okay? And so here I have to find a bus. I'm from the train and find a bus, and no Google answer, and I have to go to a human being to find an answer to my question. Where is that bus station that I can take? So a lot of situational knowledge is not codified. We have to realize that, and there we rely once again on human knowledge. So a lot of this, there's such a ton of knowledge in there, but a lot is not codified in our world. Good news. Here's something else to note, and this is quite interesting. So this shows something about the intelligence of these models. Okay, so this particular study says so ChatGPT 4 scored on, so this is verbal IQ 152. You know, and I'm very mindful in that, and I think I put it here. ChatGPT rivals the verbal performance of individuals with very high IQ on test tasks chosen to assess intelligence. It doesn't mean it has that intelligence, but a human being of that IQ would perform like GPT performs on such tasks. That's very different. So because a human can do a lot of other things and have that verbal performance, but you know, scary good, right? So really something, and where does all the data come from? From the collective. We should still be reminded. We gave it all the data, right? Because it's all the web, it's Wikipedia, and it's a few other things sucked up in these large language models. Here's something else interesting, and that is the growth model size. So you see here, this is billion parameters. So we're coming to the size of in terms of neurons, and this is shooting up like crazy. And I put just a reminder on that. ChatGPT, I told you, it costs a lot of energy, right? To train ChatGPT costs about 1.3 gigawatt hours. To train ChatGPT 4 costs about 50 to 60 gigawatt hours. You might say, many of us don't know, and that's the electricity consumption of Hamburg. Hamburg is 1 million households, a 2 million person city, roughly. 45 days you can run Hamburg's electricity, and that's ChatGPT. Now, if we go in if you go GPT-5 and we go in another order of magnitude, so let's say we are at 500 gigawatt hours, or next level of terawatt hour, right? So 1 terawatt hour, then we are moving to, that's like Hamburg and Berlin in Germany for a whole year. Whoa, and that's one model. And then comes everybody else's, because so it's not an open AI, so the bird, and you have all the other ones, and whoa, everybody's zapping up all that energy. So there will be a limit to growth of these models in terms of training them, as I pointed out. So that's so it's not going to grow like orders of magnitude and orders of magnitude. There will be certain limits, but we still have probably 2 more levels to go. It's kind of good news, bad news scenario. And I skipped this one also. What I'm skipping is actually one of my former research, like PhD fellow, and I looked actually at the problem, and we thought actually that before this came out, that the future would be that large AI models would suck up actually not the knowledge of just factual knowledge that we see, but research papers, because modern research papers, and you may know this, in the abstract or in the model description, we reveal what our model is, essentially independent variables, dependent variables, and the relationships, if we are writing our papers right, in the title and the abstract and so on, and grabbing that and then doing deductive reasoning just based on all these models would give also enormous power. And I wouldn't even be surprised if, so the next level of models, they're saying, okay, we got all we can get from the data, now let's go for the propositions that we can find and evaluate those. And then once you combine it, then you have multi-level reasoning plus all the predictive reasoning we have on the surface level. That might be the killer. But into the future. So another one of those S-curves. So in the future, what we'll see, there will be commodity knowledge, pretty much the knowledge that comes as dirt cheap, and then will come something like where we use artificial intelligence. Not so cheap, but it's it's ramping up. And the artificial intelligence will take over and over and over. And then there will be some knowledge which, the really expensive knowledge, I would consider artisan knowledge. And artisans from former times, you might think of them as craftspeople with an artistic element. So they were these artistic geniuses, but also had craft skills. And so they mean that's a muscle intelligence, what you might say. It's in their fingers, or their tacit knowledge. They cannot describe what they're doing, but they can do it. And so this particular part, if you can afford it, you can get this. If you don't want to afford it, you may draw on a lot of this. So humans and there's linear models. And this is if you are here, if you live here, and this is the best we can perform, we are in trouble, so to speak, because this will be absolute commodity, but this will be the action. And for us, as we are in this room, on the tail end with the high IQ and knowledge creators. We are in this area, right? But this means something different to us, namely, currently we're in this model of sharing all the time. The sharing of the best of our knowledge may not be the model of the future anymore, because we set it free and then we commoditize ourselves. It's kind of crazy. Right now we have this model of open free sharing of our research. We publish it and we set it free, and really so we undermine essentially our competitive function. I'll give you two examples. For those of you into music, the Stradivarius violin, the world's most famous violin. There are a few of them still around from the late 18th century. And so many say, and there's a little bit of myth also to that, of course, the sound has not been replicated. But even if the sound has not been replicated, the sound 200 something years later is so good, and these violins still perform so well. It's a 200 plus year old wooden thing, and people give $10 million to buy it, right? Is not just because it's old, but because it plays so well. And the creators knew something very, very special about violin making. And they probably didn't know that it would last for 200 something years, but they knew something very, very special. And their glues don't dry up, not like our glues today. And so they had something special, but they didn't share it. So if you want this knowledge in a way, you can only buy it in this package. You cannot, Mr. Stradivarius, please share with me what you know. No, impossible. So you buy the artifact. That's artisan knowledge. Or we have, of course, the sage from Omaha, Warren Buffett, right? Everybody wants to be Warren Buffett. Maybe I can beat Warren Buffett, everybody thinks, right? There are legions of stock market experts who want to beat Warren Buffett. But he has beaten the stock market, I think, 2/3 out of the last 50 years or whatever. And his performance compared to the S&P is 150 times. It's unbelievable. Mr. Buffett how have you done it? And then he gives you some folksy story. Oh, yeah, we look at intrinsic value, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, he's not sharing with you his model. What he says is, we buy my stock type thing, right? And so you can buy the artifact, his stock, but you cannot buy the algorithm. Yes.
Just wanted to circle back on your previous example. For example, you take chess.
Yes.
Like Gary Kasparov and other grandmasters that beat the computer.
Oh, I did. Yeah,
And-
interesting.
And they update with their games again. The chess engine is updated, and they still manage to beat it. So there is some amount of artisan knowledge there. But do you think that is in an abstract form, not which cannot be broken down into stages? That is why it's not coming up.
Yes, because a lot of what we do in order, I mentioned our clock speed is something like 10 hertz, right? You can do 10 instructions per second if we think about it. So we have to operate our intelligence tasks very differently from what a machine does. So we have to collect really large chunks of knowledge. And so within a tenth of a second, we invoke this larger chunk of knowledge, which gives us the answer. And so it's, in a way, I give you a simple example. If I ask you, what's 2 plus 2? And instantly you say 4 to me. And I say, how did you do this? And then you say, oh, you subtract 1 and you add it in 3 plus 1, 4 plus 0, and then I'm there. And then say, what is 17 times 17? And you may know the answer as well, or 15 times 15. And I say, how did you do this? And then you explain to me once again, but you couldn't have done it in such a short time. There's what you explain to me and what you actually do, right? And so that's a difference. And so if Kasparov beats the machine, it's not because suddenly he has much faster firing neurons. He trained differently and now can beat the machine. But with some process which cuts through all this. These machines take a lot more wattage to do their work than this is like what 15 watts or something that we have running here, right? This is nothing, right? By comparison for all this processing that we're doing. So clearly we're doing something technically very, very different. And if they are beating this, yes, but Kasparov will now for sure not tell you how he's done it, right? Because this is artisan.
My point was that he probably cannot explain.
And he may not be able to. Absolutely true.
Yeah, maybe building off of that point, are you familiar with like the egg balancing trick that they gave ChatGPT or with that? So what happened was apparently you were talking about how like they use whatever the collective stuff I search in ChatGPT, write a research paper for me on whatever, Freud. It'll give what's already out there. And so the researchers at Microsoft tried to give a problem that would not be able to be found on the internet. And so they said, how would you balance, if you look it up on Google, they'll show you, but how would you balance an egg, a bottle, a nail, and an egg, or something like that? And it kind of gave gibberish in ChatGPT 3. But in ChatGPT 4, it actually starts to reason, and they give, like, it as actually able to solve the problem. And so some of the researchers are saying now it's crossed that threshold for just looking at the collective intelligence and actually able to reason, and they haven't quite been able to explain that. And I'm curious, just from your perspective, how would you, kind of like you have the deductive and you have like the other one, are we crossing that threshold now with ChatGPT 4 and some of the other models?
I don't think so, right? I really think it's still on the deductive, but just like so, when we cannot see the 26 move when we are at 11, it seems so surprising, right? And I think that's what we are still seeing, okay? A lot of moves ahead. I think what is happening is that they built in some structuring, so some decomposition and structuring routines. I really think so, because otherwise it's just too good for flat reasoning. And they also built into the network some feedback loops. Typically, so these networks go so one way, but they loop back, which has other interesting characteristics to it. I think what I've read is that the originators don't understand even what's going on there, right? That is the scary part in a way.
Yeah, that's kind of what the researchers were talking about. They're like, I don't know how we got this answer from ChatGPT, and they were constantly like, we maybe have like crossed the threshold point where like we can't reason in the same way, or we can't explain like what's going on, which they would say it's kind of scary.
And so, really, we all have this as a test bed available to us, right? If you're thinking as a researcher, oh, where are the boundaries, right? So this really is fantastic new frontier for research, understanding logic, understanding boundaries, and the good and the bad, just like we did with our human subjects, kind of to test out, and that's where I'm going to follow up on my people versus language model on creative tasks, because I want to see where are we, right? So we get a dramatic situation. But I want to remind us once more, and that is really this thing about, especially on here we have a quantitative task. This is a stock market picker. When you think we must be able to explain that, so a linear model, we must be able to economic model. We understand this. All these economists and finance professors we have, they must be able to come up with some logic what Warren Buffett does. But if we don't know the inputs that the individual looks at, and we don't know their quote-unquote algorithm or principles, then the only thing we have is the output, namely the recommendation. And that may not be enough. So, which brings me back, and I think this brings me to the end of, the artisan, creativity, skill, tacit knowledge, not codified, right? This is, we just talked about that. New to the world outcomes and creating tangible outcomes shown as a work product. So the intention, knowledge, and skill are only exhibited in the product and not any expressed formula algorithms. I don't share. Yes.
So do you think you could take today, the works of a recognized artists and feed them into the system, and maybe take the works of people who aren't very good at artwork, feed that into the system, tell the system that the recognized artist that those images are good and the others are bad, and see if the system can produce good images based on that?
Yes, I think that's possible. And because we've seen already in generative art, the variations combine a Picasso and a Cadiz or something like that, right?
Ultimately, it's the first item on that list. Now, ultimately, it's trying to instill in the software a sense of creativity, of what humans consider to be good creativity.
And and I'm in the School of Creative Media, and we went to one computer concert, so AI-based concert, and so my colleagues in the school, we're all poo-pooing the works and saying, oh, this is repetitive, this is, oh, you can really feel this is so created by machine, not by human being. So, and in part, they knew it was created by machine. So I take that with a grain of salt. But I think we will get better as human beings in recognizing, for example, what has been written by an AI, because we can tune ourselves, our own neural network, to recognize so these differentiation, the fineness of output, and surprisingly, we may be able to pick it up, machine or non-machine. Just like, you look at a screen and there's like 16 million different colors on your screen, and people will still see if there's something is not right. They may not be able to say what's not right, but something in the hue here is not right, or so in the shading, they pick that up. CGI, people get trained to pick up, oh, this is computer created. It's like humans have this uncanny ability to train their real eye on those. So I don't know the answer in a way. So I'm kind of just giving you some answers, not knowing the right one. But I want to bring this to an end as takeaways. So collectives, and this is where we go full circle, collectives can perform at higher level than individuals through aggregation of fractional process and repetition. We saw the example. Artificial intelligence can draw on the knowledge of collectives by parameterizing these insights and development of corresponding prediction models, which are again better than what these collectives did, right? Like the loan officers. Large prediction models can outperform performance of human experts, particularly on structured tasks, and perform much faster. And that's, of course, we all know that. Human superiority may increasingly rely on private knowledge, extreme specialization, new to the world creativity, artisan-like activity, and average AI level performance will become so a commodity or near commodity. And you know, I end with a big sideline. My PhD students, I always tell them, embargo your dissertation for the first 2 years after you finish. It's not in the library, okay? It is their private knowledge for the while. And I think so. The world will go to a model which is much more private model. Pay me for my private knowledge, and the open knowledge, just like we know nowadays, is what you can get for free, is generally useful, but it's not the high value logic. And so, and in academia, where we were so generous with our knowledge sharing, we may need to have a different model, just a kind of, and maybe a quote unquote monetization, right? And if you know about copyright law protects your words, not your ideas, right? So if someone takes, let's say, your PhD students, or if your PhD, your dissertation, and just rewords it, which is now very easy to, and then publish it, they did not violate the copyright. You were saying they stole my ideas, yeah, but that's not illegal, quote unquote. So they can do this, and then they can, so they took the, because we have no idea protection in that sense. We have word protection, because our legal system is not yet ready for generative AI. And so so in the interim, we may have to think of, oh, you're protecting us, and finding, so we make maybe a micro monetization model. I get little royalties for this thing I know and that thing I know, just as we have with the patent model, where we have so big monetization, right? But that's a much longer story, not for today. Today, I think we stop here, and I'll thank you very much.
So overall, I mean, you gave that graph in terms of what's into the future, and it was pretty much like a smooth curve when you considered the artificial intelligence, right? And going back to your point on where you asked the ChatGPT about the relationship between human intelligence and carbon footprint, are we in some ways going into the territory of hallucination, where you know, the machine is relating to different things just because it has been asked to do so? And the thing is, that's exactly where I feel like human judgment will have a very high premium. Because, I mean, if you ask a machine to do something, it will do it because you asked it to do so. But you need to be able to judge this thing. I'm not saying hallucination is a bad thing. There might be creativity in hallucination, and you might end up thinking in ways that you could not have thought of. But what's important there is human judgment. And the other aspect is explainability and interpretability of how the machine is generating the answer, right? So isn't that an issue? Because you don't want to get too much into the hallucination part, where you unnecessarily tie two things that are not related to each other, and in the process, in the long term, the knowledge we're generating might come down.
You know, you touched on this very important point, namely, I started by saying, oh, there was this promise, the internet sets us free, so truth will be widespread and so on. And now we can actually, and we can force our AI to give us these fake models, fake images, and so on. And we need even better human judgment to determine, is this real or not? Or we need even more tools, right? So we need, so we have here this AI, and then we have this AI, but in the end, probably human judgment. And strangely enough, the direct interaction may become more important. You cannot trust the video that you see anymore, or the photos. You have to see that person in for real, right? So to say, did they actually say this type thing, right? It is so. So we are coming from the individual to the collective to the artificial, and then again to the individual. Full circle, and we same with this. First we come from the face-to-face, then we're online, or the internet sets us free, and now we're going full circle, and no, the internet doesn't set us free, and we need to have the face-to-face again. You know, interesting worlds, right?
That could be related to the multiplier effect, right? So if the crowd that you're using to train your model, so in this case, the average AI is using non-experts essentially, anybody's age. So if you actually have some kind of a thinking criteria with high IQ, people can actually be the subjects, then you're going to automatically raise the average IQ level. At the same time, you also reduce the likelihood of multiplying misinformation, for example. So, I mean, if that's going to happen, then you're going to have amplified misinformation, which is going to lead to fake news and all these things. So we think that is where something.
Yeah, you know, this downward spiral. So you know, your language model saps the knowledge out of Wikipedia, and then you use that language model to create a new Wikipedia article. So now, you know, you're having the snake eating itself, right? So where are we coming to? And there's another aspect. People, so the collective contributes to something like Wikipedia because they feel they're adding to the knowledge in the world. I'm doing something good for the common, right? Common good. But if now a language model can do the same thing that, you know, I took hours to generate and just puts it in there, I may not want to contribute anymore. And I had a study with one of my former PhD students. We looked into that, namely, why do people contribute to something like Wikipedia? Where there's no incentive really, but they do it for, you know, altruistic purposes. But, you know, if a language model can do this, maybe no more interest for me, right? And then this thing spirals down because originally it came from, that was the origin, right? So, you know, numerous interesting questions on the ethics side, on the logic side, monetization side, creativity versus non-creativity, what's the underlying model, can we explain it? You know, fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
So, one question was, what is collective intelligence without individual talent, and does it require objectivity?
We need individual talent, right? And if we aggregate noise, we get noise. So the individuals who contribute have to bring something, namely the ability to separate what's not from what is, or the ability to have at least a partial explanation for a phenomenon. And we all only have, you know, we are researchers, and then we are proud that our model explains 48% of the variance. That means we have a partial explanation, right? The 52% we cannot explain, right? So that is what comes in, a partial explanation, ability to rule out, and then we aggregate from there. So that's the individual aspect. And what was the second part of the question?
Does it require objectivity?
Objectivity. It requires when bias comes in, and we talked about this. So if I want my football game to win, and that's why I root for my football team, yes, I create noise, negative information, and then the collective will fail. Okay, the collective is really built on a logic of that people want to find the right answer, and so in a way that they're incentivized to find the right answer. Interesting example, and so there is one country in the world, and I don't mention this country enough, but where the ask the audience doesn't work because the audience purposely misleads the player and gives them the wrong answer, and so that's where it fails. You can read this up on the internet, which country that is, okay? But the phenomenon exists. So yes, bias is absolutely kills this whole thing, okay? Purposeful or unintentional bias, because or should be wishful bias. It all goes away. And this was in these prediction market, decision markets, we incentivize players not to just wish for my team to win or wish for a certain outcome. No, you put money behind it and you win more if you guessed right, right? So that's kind of where we take that bias in a way out of if people are financially motivated.
That's about it. So let us give a big round of applause to you.
Thank you very much.
Who is actually both of them are here, Pawan and Mark. You will be going for dinner with